you have to trust that their numbers are accurate and that they're not cheating. Now, some of the bigger companies, obviously, they're not actively cheating, but you can imagine the fraudsters are deliberately cheating, right?
Oh,
So
yeah.
there are so many techniques, right? One of the key vulnerabilities of Google Analytics is that anyone with your UTM code can actually write bad data into it.
Welcome to Endless Coffee Cup, a regular discussion of marketing news, culture, and media for our complex digital lifestyle. Join Matt Bailey as he engages in conversation to find insights beyond the latest headlines and deeper understanding for those involved in marketing. Grab a cup of coffee, have a seat, and thanks for joining.
Well, hello, listener, and welcome to another edition of the Endless Coffee Cup podcast. And I have a past guest with me again today, Dr. Augustine Fou. Dr. Fou, how are you doing today?
Hey, Matt, very good. Glad to be here with you again.
Oh, thank you. And, we've been going back and forth ever since, your past visits on the podcast. And I love seeing your updates on LinkedIn about ad fraud, analytics. You're doing a great job of keeping the industry on their toes about what's going on in ad tech and ad fraud.
Thank you. Well, I'm a scientist, so if I can't find the numbers to back it up, then it's just myth or theory or something. So I always like to see if there's any kind of numbers that make it concrete and real.
That's a great statement right there because the other night I was reading something and I think it was probably one of your posts, and this was just going through numbers. And I just explained, I'm like, everything's fake. Everything is fake. Anytime someone gives you any type of number at all, or, even looking at certain videos, things, I'm just overwhelmed sometimes with just how much is fake. And
Yeah. I
we
mean, in
use,
digital, it's just so easy, right? So,
yeah.
everyone's heard of the fake influencers where they're buying likes on their Facebook page or they're
hmm
buying more views for the YouTube videos. Because I think people in the early days got a sense that, oh, if this video has more views, then it must be more popular, right? So
Right.
what do those people who cheat do? They just basically go on and buy more views. And those views are generated by bots, not by real people. So if they can juice their numbers, it makes it look better, right?
Yeah.
So there's been a lot of that going on, and we now have probably, bad guys have 20 years of experience doing that. So in digital, it's almost like you have to assume it's fake first until
hmm
proven real, right? And you got to have that common sense, right? Sometimes in my line of work, when we're talking about digital advertising, if we're talking about some of the numbers being thrown around by the ad tech companies, the one company claims to be looking at 15 trillion bid requests per week. Just think about that with common sense. How many humans would it take to generate that much? Right? It's really hard to get humans to go to your website when you want them to, but it's
Right.
super
Right.
easy to buy bot traffic, right? You can tell the botnet, I need 10 million page views on my site by tomorrow, and they'll do it faithfully for you, right? So it's very easy to fake those metrics, and that's why you have to be constantly vigilant about fake numbers and fake everything online.
Oh, absolutely. And, it led to, I think, a great teachable moment with my kids in, let's talk about Instagram. And yeah, there's the fake follower counts, but then you throw on filters. Then you throw on, and there's one account, I forget what it's called. I think it's called Influencers in the Wild. And it's people who have stumbled upon an influencer either taking video of themselves or having people around them taking videos of themselves.
Hmm.
And they just look ridiculous because they're
Yeah.
dancing or something in public, but they're also doing 4 or 5 or 6 or more takes of the same exact
Yeah,
thing.
that's the reality, right? You don't see that. Living here in New York City, you see that all over the place, right? And there's actually almost every single day here at the New York Public Library, there's people doing Instagram stuff on the steps because
Oh,
it's a
yep.
landmark location. So yeah, that, absolutely. You only see the final product, and of course, you only see the best shot that they want you to see, right? It doesn't reflect the reality of the 16 takes they had to do to get that one shot that's perfect, right? And
Yeah.
people are going to post good looking stuff. They're not going to post realistic stuff. So what you're getting is a world that's displayed to you through rose-colored glasses. It's
Oh,
not really
absolutely.
reflective of reality.
Absolutely. You know, we used to have a saying, didn't we, back in the day, that, I've got to see it to believe it.
Yeah.
And that's been turned on its head. You absolutely can't believe what you're seeing.
Exactly. I think we're waiting for the courts to no longer accept photographic evidence or videographic evidence. Because
Wow.
now, we've known for years with Photoshop you can manipulate images.
Hmm.
But now, there's more powerful tools and there's AI. You heard of deep fakes,
Yeah.
where they can literally swap Obama's face onto some other person talking and then make it look like he said something that he never actually said.
Mm,
So that's the world we live in. And these tools have been available to hackers and bad guys for a long, long time. And now they're becoming more and more mainstream. They're easy to use. In fact, a lot of those face swap apps in Google Play Store or whatever allow just regular people to do that.
mm,
And that's extremely dangerous if you don't know that that's possible, right? Because you'll
absolutely.
think that some person said this when they never literally said that.
Wow. Yeah, it's amazing what is happening with technology and all of these things. And, it used to be, it was just video out of context that, you see it, you make a judgment, but then you see, oh, there's another minute that preceded what I saw
Yeah,
or that
exactly.
was after what I saw. And we had to struggle with context, but now we
They can
can
make it up
do
entirely.
whatever. Yeah,
Yeah, they can
absolutely.
fabricate it. I mean, and that mirrors some of the stuff that I see, so faking a video is actually harder, right? You do need video processing software and all that kind of stuff. But faking data, for example, in digital marketing is
Mm,
super easy. In fact,
right.
we've seen many cases where some of these ad tech vendors were literally fabricating the log files. So, in an effort to prove that ads ran somewhere, they literally made it all up, right? The ads never ran, they never paid any money. They literally made up all the log files to make it look like they ran ads. And, it's all just bits and bytes, and it's all just computer processing power.
Wow.
So, you should not trust any of that.
It's funny because when you say that, years ago, I would have loved to have one of those log files because when I'm looking at analytics companies or when I'm looking at analytics, what analytics should I use? I want data to populate in order to see what it looks like.
Yep.
And one of those log files would be extremely valuable for a test case and for some sample data.
Yeah, and kind of like you said, we should no longer trust videographic evidence or photographic evidence. That principle holds true with even log files now.
Hmm.
Because of the ease with which bad guys can just create them out of thin air, right? It's just letters and numbers in a database somewhere. They can make it look pretty realistic. But that's
Absolutely.
why I don't take anyone else's log files, because the other principle you should remember is kind of like in a crime scene investigation, something called chain of custody, right?
Mm,
So if you don't know who touched the evidence or, in the chain, you can't rely on it anymore because someone could have tampered with it, right? So chain of custody of the data is extremely important. And that's why I don't take historic log file data because I don't know its provenance. I don't know who touched it, who created it, how it was collected, whether there was any security mechanisms in place to prevent bad data being injected in there. So for some of the studies that I do, I have to put my code in for analytics, right? So we gather the data real time because I understand what the limitations of the data collection are and whether there are any vulnerabilities or security loopholes that could be exploited. And knowing that gives you more confidence in the accuracy and reliability of the data. And without that, you can't draw any reliable insights or conclusions from it because it could be entirely faked.
oh, absolutely. And that's one I know when I'm teaching analytics, it's one of the areas that I start with is let's just talk about accuracy and reliability,
Yeah.
just from the standpoint of collecting data. And when you think about, you know, bot traffic, but also when you think about just the accuracy of collecting data on humans themselves,
Hmm.
that you're you're 100% going to capture all the bot traffic, but it's humans that are confusing. It's humans that are difficult to wrap your mind around what they're trying to do, why are they going here. There's
Yeah.
no sense to what they're doing, whereas bots are very predictable. And I remember, I think it was early 2000s, I had a client that They paid for a link or an advertisement. And of course, what happened, what the trigger was for me, the red flag, was they guaranteed at least 1,000 visitors a month.
Yep.
And I said to the client, I'm like, wait a minute, you can't guarantee that. And what
Yes.
was interesting is when we started looking at their analytics, there was exactly 1,000 visitors a month.
Yes.
And they all came on the same date, and they all spent, and they all like one page view. And this was early 2000s, and I'm
Yeah.
trying to show the client, like, you just got rolled.
Yep.
And it's not
And I
difficult to
think
do.
in just that one example, you illustrated a couple of really key points, right? First thing would be guarantee, right? You force 1,000 humans to go to your site when you want them to, right? So first
Right.
of all, common sense will tell you that that's not possible. But bot traffic, it's very easy, right? You literally tell the botnet, I need exactly 1,000 page views on my site, right? And you can even pass all the query strings to make it look like it came from that campaign. So, 20 years ago, 10 years ago, all of this stuff is just regular practice for the bad guys. And good guys don't even realize that's possible. And the other thing in your example is that you kind of, when you looked at the details, you kind of saw all of those 1,000 visits come on the same day. You can't get, all of it to occur at the same time, except, with humans, but you can do that with botnets. The other problem I'm going to highlight here is the problem of averages, right? So if you look at just the entire month period, you got your 1,000, but
Hmm.
you think it's spread out over multiple days, right? You get a few per day and whatever, and by the end of the month you got your 1,000. But if you actually had the daily breakdown or the hourly breakdown, and you saw all 1,000 came in the same hour, then common sense will tell you that's not possible, right? So one of the key principles that I teach is, averages really are not good, meaning they hide the fraud, right? If you are able to get more detailed breakdowns, like by day or by hour, or in some of the placement when we do programmatic campaigns, right? If you look at each individual domain as opposed to a blended average across everything, you will see that some of these domains have 100% click-through rates,
Hmm.
or they'll have volume of ad impressions served in the overnight hours when humans are sleeping, right? So little things like that allow you to very easily pick out the fraud just with your own analytics, right? You don't need any kind of specialized tools, but if you just look more closely and get more details, you'll be able to see that some of this stuff just doesn't make any sense.
Absolutely. And that gets to probably, I think, the number one thing and the number one need that I've seen in marketers, and I've heard this from numerous other guests on the show, other articles, and it's the need for marketers to understand basic analytics.
Yep.
That they don't have to be data scientists, but just like what you said, to go look at where did these visitors come from, what was the domain, what days that they come, knowing where to go find basic information and understanding what you're seeing is such a critical skill for marketers. No matter what, if you're running a campaign, you need to understand the data that it's producing.
Yeah, and I think it's in direct contrast to the way I've seen digital marketing being done in more recent years, right? With programmatic, everything just felt easy, right? You can
Mm,
put some money in and you got all these results out, right? The results we're talking about are not actual sales. The results are typically reported as number of clicks, number of page views on your site, and that kind of stuff. So in that particular case, I kind of call it marketers are doing digital marketing as if they were playing a video game, right? It's almost like, oh, we got these shiny colors on a dashboard and more numbers are, bigger numbers are better. Kind of like a higher score is better.
right.
But you can't actually do that. You can't set it and forget it. You actually have to look at the analytics yourself to see if it even makes sense, right? But a lot of the largest marketers have kind of outsourced that. So whether
Mm.
it's an analytics department that's a different department than your marketing people, right? That's not a good idea. Or you hand it off to your agency, and then what are they going to tell you? They're going to tell you everything's working swimmingly, so don't worry about it, keep spending. So you can't actually set it and forget it and think it's someone else's responsibility, right? If you're spending millions of dollars in digital marketing, you should be looking at the analytics. And again, you don't have to be an expert. You don't have to spend 12 hours a day looking at it like I do, right? Or other analytic people, but you have to at least look at it to see if any of it makes sense. And better yet, really bring in sales and outcomes data if possible, right? I realize in some of the bigger companies, those are, again, different departments, right? It's the CFO's department that's tracking sales and all that kind of stuff. And sometimes you don't have ready access to that. But in any case, you should be aware of the risks and limitations of using quantity data, and especially if those quantities are digital things like clicks or page views or in number of impressions or things like that. Right? Any kind of quantity metric is so easily faked by bots and other forms of fraud in digital that, again, you need to be sensitive to the fact that it may not be 100% reliable.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. And that's what that understanding of analytics provides you, is that really the being equipped to do the job, to understand those things. And I'm seeing more and more marketing groups, companies asking for that basic digital
Yep.
understanding, the analytics. And it's been such a refreshing. I think analytics has always been in demand, but I think more and more people are understanding that this is a key skill
Yep.
for the next 20 years for this industry and for this type of marketing.
Yeah, and I think in digital, the early days, the theory was in digital, everything's measurable. Okay,
Hmm.
but what if the things you're measuring are not the right things, right? And what if the numbers that you're seeing in the analytics are, unreliable, meaning they've been tampered with and stuff like that? So not only do you need to have a working knowledge of it, right? You don't, again, you're not an analytics person that has to do this 12 hours a day. But as a marketer, this is a core skill that you can't just outsource, right? And it's not only understanding the basics of analytics, but also getting some kind of a gut feel for what is realistic and what's not, right? So in the early days, the reason I kind of got into the fraud side of things was I was just looking at click-through rates that were 70%, 100%, 50%. And having been in digital marketing long enough, we know that humans don't click on ads that much, right?
Right.
So for banner ads, the rough ballpark is 0.1%, so 1 in 1,000. For search ads, it's a little bit better. It's probably 1 in 100, so about
Hmm.
1%. You know, but if you're orders of magnitude out of whack, right, when you're seeing click-through rates on banner ads reported as 50%, 70%, or even 100%, something's wrong with that. It's not that your campaign is doing so awesome that that many people clicked on it. It's because it's all bot activity,
Hmm.
right? So that's when I started looking into this. That doesn't make any sense. And I'm kind of encouraged because, the younger marketers coming out, they're not kind of fettered with old habits, bad habits, right? And some of the older marketers, they come out of TV and whatever, so they think, oh, wow, it's so magical in digital that we get all these numbers, but they don't even ask the question, are these even real? So I'm glad that the younger marketers coming out are actually starting to ask these harder questions. They're looking to train themselves, right? Take
Right.
courses and things like that, like your analytics course, to bolster their knowledge and common sense about what is realistic and what is not in analytics, because that's a core skill that they got to have.
Absolutely. And one of the things that I've changed in my training just to get the point across is I offer 5 different definitions of an impression.
Hmm.
And what is and I ask them, what is your organization's definition of an impression?
Hmm.
And it's very interesting that out of the 5 options, I will give a nearly even distribution of answers be,
Interesting.
because they all
Yes.
sound good.
Hmm.
It's an ad that's been seen, people like that. And then I'll use the Facebook definition of anything greater than 0 pixels and
Yes.
0 seconds. And it really shocks them
Yeah.
that internally in our company, when we talk about an impression, I'm thinking of it from a human term,
Yeah.
but we're buying digitally from a company that defines it this way.
Yep.
And if
And you don't check it, right? You don't get to
right,
check it. So it's whatever metric they happen to say they like, and they'll report it to you. And unless you have an independent way of verifying it or checking it, you're beholden to them, right? You have to trust that their numbers are accurate and that they're not cheating. Now, some of the bigger companies, obviously, they're not actively cheating, but you can
hmm,
imagine the fraudsters are deliberately cheating, right?
oh
So
yeah,
there are so many techniques, right? One of the key vulnerabilities of Google Analytics is that anyone with your UTM code can actually write bad data into it. So I've seen
Wow.
cases where you go out and say, "Oh, I'm running a campaign. I want to get so much traffic." They can literally write fake data into your Google Analytics to make it look like you got the traffic when they didn't even have to send the bot to load your web page, right? They even save the time. They save the effort.
Wow.
They don't even need bots to do it. They can just manipulate your GA to make it look like you got the traffic that you were promised. So getting back to your case of, oh, how can you guarantee that? Oh, I can certainly guarantee that because I'm using bot traffic. Humans, right?
Oh, that's amazing. That is so amazing. And it gets to the point there that if my definition of this term, my definition of impression or view does not match internally within my company where I'm buying it from, then we're speaking a different language. We're reporting different things. If my management has the perception that an impression is a physical human view,
Mm-hmm.
then we're not even talking about the same thing. And so
Mm-hmm.
it starts within organizationally that shared understanding of what do these terms mean?
Mm-hmm.
What are we actually buying? And how do we understand that and apply that to our expectation or our outcome of the campaign?
Yep. And once you can narrow down those definitions and agree on which is the one you're going to be using, then you can actually start measuring correctly. And then you
Right.
can actually see if your digital marketing is actually generating the outcomes you thought it was generating. Because a lot of times, here's another concept I like to talk about, which is correlation versus causation. So there are many, many cases where there are sales happening when there are digital marketing campaigns happening. Those are just happening at the same time. It doesn't mean that the digital marketing campaigns were causing the sales, right?
Right.
So for a lot of the largest companies, this affects them disproportionately because they sell soup and soda in grocery stores. They don't sell online. So they don't usually have that feedback loop of did these ads actually drive sales of soup in the grocery store? So they're just assuming that it does, but at best, it's correlated, right? You're running digital marketing at the same time that the sales were occurring. Right? Remember the famous P&G example where they turned off $200 million of their digital spend and the sales just kept happening. So you could clearly see that the digital marketing, right, the $200 million of digital spent in digital did not cause any of the sales. The sales of the soup and soda or Tide or detergent or whatever was going to happen anyway.
Right.
So for marketers, they also need to understand the difference between correlation and they also need to understand incrementality, right? Did every dollar that I spent in digital or any other form of marketing cause incremental sales, which means sales the amount of sales that would have happened anyway. And I
Hmm.
think too few marketers are actually taking that extra step and really looking at incrementality.
Absolutely. And that's, I remember the last time, one of the last times we talked, that was a challenge that you gave, at the beginning of COVID when everything's up in the air. People were asking, how are we going to respond to that? And
Hmm.
one of your pieces of advice was shut everything off, see
Hmm.
what's working, and see if sales are still happening there. And I'm wondering if that's part of the, one of the things we talked about is you've seen that things are starting to shift, that people are
Yes.
starting to respond to this. And I'm hoping that part of that was your advice to shut it off and get a sense of what's your baseline, what's
Yeah, well, it
happening.
may not have been my advice per se, but because of COVID, big pausing their stuff, right? In the height of it, in middle of 2020, they did pause some of their digital spending because, people were literally not going out, so they couldn't go buy stuff even if you wanted them to, right? So they paused their campaigns in the middle of 2020. They started to realize, okay, well, nothing's changing, right? So in their kind of they're about to turn stuff back on, they're being a little bit more cautious about it. So an uptick in Q4 of 2020 and then throughout all of last year where the marketers are starting to be more vigilant, right? They're looking more closely, right? The number of marketers that came to me to say, can you help us with some audits, right? We want to take a closer look. That really happened in 2021, last year. And I'm encouraged that that's going to continue through this year and beyond. And as they're looking more closely, they're starting to realize some of the stuff that we assumed was working wasn't working at all, or wasn't at least wasn't working the way they expected, right? So now they're being more cautious, asking for more of those details, like we said earlier, right? So they're finally asking for placement reports with domain level breakdown.
As a regular listener of the Endless Coffee Cup, you know that I am passionate about learning and teaching others. With that, I've launched my own education portal for marketing professionals. It's at learn.sitelogic.com. I'm creating and launching a series of courses on analytics. First course is how to create an analytics strategy that aligns to your business objectives. The second course is 6 analytics skills that turn data into insights. The third course, launching in just a few weeks, is how to eliminate data overload and improve your presentations. This final course teaches you how to speak the language of the C-suite in your presentations, making you more persuasive, powerful, and effective in your marketing role. You'll also find short topics on data, Google algorithms, and local SEO. And finally, the centerpiece is the OMCA certification course. This is a 40-hour coached course that provides you with a solid digital marketing foundation. At the successful conclusion of this course, you are eligible to sit for the OMCA exam, and you'll receive a free voucher for the exam, a $225 value that is included with your course enrollment. I'm an advocate of the OMCA certification, as OMCA certified marketers make 16 to 25% more than their non-certified coworkers. The OMCA is proof of your skills and knowledge in this industry. Go to learn.sitelogic.com right now to accelerate your marketing career.
Right? Previously, they would just get an Excel spreadsheet at the end of the month that said, here's the 10 billion ads that you bought, and here's how many, millions of clicks you got. And none of it gave them enough details to do anything with. So getting back to our point about the averages, right? So all the fraud was right there, but because averages and total numbers per month were, reported to them, they couldn't see any of it, right? So now that they're getting more detailed reports and they're looking more closely, they're asking harder questions, that's actually starting to gather steam. And we're starting to see more marketers realize, okay, well, this wasn't working the way we thought it was working. And I think a lot of that was because prior to the pandemic, no one wanted to be the one to rock the boat, right? Everything was just going along, and we're getting huge click-through rates and lots of clicks. So no one wanted to be the one to rock the boat. But because the virus rocked the boat, now everyone has an opportunity to see it. And that's kind of what led to my advice last year, which was, okay, here's an opportunity for you to turn it off and see what happens, right? Because previously you wouldn't be the one to say, recommend to your boss, let me go turn off my digital marketing, right? But now they have those kind of pauses where they can actually see the difference.
Absolutely. And I'm hoping that part of this is there's more emphasis on outcome. What is it that we are trying to drive? And is it actionable? And like you were saying, so much of this data that's produced is not actionable data. It doesn't, what do I do? It's the most basic question. And that's the promise of the data, that analytics data, you're going to get so much data, you won't know what to do with it. Well, that's exactly what's happening.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I have a perfect example for you, right? So a lot of the fraud detection companies are what I call black box, right? Black box means they simply report you a number and then they don't tell you how they got that number, right? Why was something marked as fraud, or why was something marked as not fraud? So when they report a number like percent IVT, so say it's 1%, say it's 5%, what can you do with that? Right, you really can't do anything except try to go get a 5% refund, right? But then the other thing that happens is that the person on the opposite end will say, well, my vendor says it's only 1%. And because that vendor is also black box, then you're just stuck in a he said, she said, right? My vendor says it's 5%, I want 5% back. The other person says, oh, my vendor says it's 1%, so we're not going to give you 5% back. So because it's black box, because you can't troubleshoot, because you can't understand how they got the number, it's not really actionable. So the alternative is, when you're looking at your own analytics, right, you don't have to use any specialized tools. If you're looking at your own analytics, you can actually see the sites and the apps that are the most egregious cheaters, right? So you'll see a site have a ton of clicks and all that kind of stuff, and then the click-through rate's 90%. Okay. When you see that level of detail, you can say, well, something's wrong with that. And if you choose to, you can actually just add that domain or mobile app to your block list, right? And what you're doing then is cleaning up the campaign while it's still running, rather than getting a fraud report at the end of the campaign to tell you what percentage was fraud, right? So the difference between not actionable, right, just getting a percent fraud from a vendor, to knowing which domains and apps to turn off during the campaign, right? Because if you're turning off those domains and apps during the campaign, you're reducing the amount of money that flows to bad guys so that you have more money left over to go to better sites and better apps. So then your campaign can actually be more effective. So that way you can monitor and manage your own campaigns. So again, you can do it with your own. So my clients are analytics to see more details than is available to them through GA, right? But that way they can monitor and manage themselves.
Well, what you did is just outline a great comparison of fraud detection versus analytics. Just there are so many services out there for programmatic companies using programmatic to try and save something. But what you're advocating is analytics is where you're going to catch and get the data you need to react.
Yes, and it's common sense, and it goes back to an earlier point. You can't set it and forget it. You can't just buy one of these fraud detection services and think it's done, right? That they prevented all of it. In fact, I've got lots of data that say they're not catching most of it, right? So when they're consistently reporting 1% IVT or invalid traffic, you shouldn't assume that the other 99% is good. It just means that they failed to detect the fraud in the other 99%. So what's a better option, like you said, is looking at your own analytics, learning how to do that. And I've seen actual small business owners do a much better job than big corporate marketers, because for the small business, if they spend $100 in digital marketing and they don't get any actual returns, they can't afford to spend the next $100. It's very different than P&G or Unilever or any one of these large advertisers. They can spend $100 million in digital and not see any return. And they wouldn't even know, because they just assume it happens because the sales are happening while they're doing digital marketing, right? Again, it wasn't caused by the digital marketing, but it just happened. So they just assume that it's related.
That's amazing. One of the things you mentioned, and I think this is part of what makes, especially the programmatic industry, it seems to run on headlines about spend. And you've
Yes.
talked about this a couple times with the focus. And again, we're at the beginning of the year. And so it's not uncommon to see headlines about how much is going to be spent on
Yes.
programmatic, and P&G is going to spend this much on
Yes.
and it's that emphasis constantly on spend. You've
Yeah,
said
and I
this
think
as well, and I've said it. It's the wrong thing.
it's the wrong thing. And I can actually offer an explanation for why people are so focused on spend. Okay, so this
Right.
goes all the way back to TV advertising. So in the early days, when you put Tide on TV, you got more sales because you made more people aware of your product that weren't formerly aware of your product, right? So in the good old days of TV advertising, when you spend more, right, you could reach more people, and the more people are aware of your product, the more people that will end up buying your product. So that's perfectly good. In digital, however, when you increase spend, it doesn't necessarily translate into increased awareness because of the fraud problem. And most of this actually started occurring in the last 10 years, right? So let me take a step back. In the good old days of internet advertising, that's meaning mid 90s, early 2000, whatever, when advertisers were buying from publishers, right? So the buyers of the ads would go to a New York Times, a Hearst, a Condé Nast, and actually buy ads from them, and the ads would actually show on their sites. Then, because those sites had, then yes, that's fine, right? The ads were shown to humans. But when programmatic took off in 2011, 2012, 2013, that's kind of when I started focusing on that's when the fraud increased. And that's because now, instead of the advertiser buying from the publisher, the advertiser is now buying from a middleman, the ad exchange. ad exchange had its purpose because now you have hundreds of thousands of sites, and the advertiser was not going to go negotiate ad deals with thousands of sites, right? So they just wanted to go one place, and the ad exchange would basically aggregate all those sites. But because we've now dissociated the buyer from the seller and inserted a middleman called the ad exchange, it actually opened the floodgates to fraud. And that's
Yeah.
in the early days, you could see, I won't name the exchange, but you could see this early exchange pretty much let everyone in. So that means, fraudsters could add tens of thousands of sites into that particular exchange and start selling ads to the largest of advertisers. Right? That wasn't possible before because a P&G would never buy from this no-name guy, sitting in Brooklyn with 10,000 sites. But now, because it's all mixed together in an exchange, the buyer now says, here's a chunk of money. Go spend it for me, right? And that exchange is going to find every possible place to put their ads, including fake sites.
Mm-hmm.
And those fake sites obviously have no human visitors. So all they're doing is they're buying 100% bot traffic. So
Well,
as
and
you can see,
you've
yeah,
published lists of some of these fake sites, and
yeah, just
honestly,
letters
they're
and numbers.
ridiculous.
Yeah,
They're
no
ridiculous.
human would ever go to those, right? So I think, just to round out the story, because of the programmatic exchanges and because of programmatic advertising on open exchanges, right, in the last 10 years, that's when the fraud has skyrocketed.
Mhm.
And that's where a lot of the dollars end up flowing to fake sites, fraudulent sites, or the ones that are bent on spreading disinformation, right? So we've seen over the years piracy sites make a lot of money through digital ads, right? Those
Mhm.
piracy sites steal the content. They don't charge the users for listening to pirated music or watching pirated movies. They make it through advertising. So if these ad dollars are flowing to the piracy sites, or if the ad dollars are flowing to disinformation sites, it allows them to make money and it allows them to keep going, right? So now we've seen a proliferation of hate speech sites,
Yeah.
disinformation sites, and so on and so forth. They now have a revenue source. So that's why the brand safety issue is now tied in with ad fraud, because again, these sites, not only are they spreading disinformation, they can also juice their own numbers by using bot traffic, right? So it all ties together and just making things worse and worse.
Well, and to put another layer on that, when you bring in brand protection, again, we have services out there that are saying we'll protect your brand from showing on these sites, and they're not doing it. They can't do it.
Yeah, you can just assume that the bad guys' bots and the bad guys' techniques are always better than the good guys' techniques. And it's not a knock against the good guys. I mean, they're trying hard. They're really desperate. But here's the reality of the situation. Someone working at a fraud detection company, right? Assuming they're tuning the algorithms and they're looking at the fraud. If they say, "Oh, we just found this new kind of fraud. We want to build into the algorithm." Right? How long do you think it's going to take to get corporate approval, right, after
Hmm.
testing and all that kind of stuff, to roll that out into production, right? So for the good guys, you can think of that as a 3 to 6 to 9 month process before they can roll out a new detection into the official production algorithm, right? Whereas for the bad guys, if they see that their bot is not making money, by the next minute they're on it, right? And they'll
Yes.
fix it within 5 minutes so that their bot can continue to make money. So for the bad guys, again, these are hackers that make the bots. They're very, very quick at troubleshooting and
Hmm.
fixing the problem, right? So they can actually get around the defenses so that their bot can continue making money. So it's really not a fair fight. The bad guys always have the advantage of not only the skill, but also they can change things very quickly, and they don't have to play by the rules.
Right.
Whereas the good guys have all these constraints like corporate, processes and approval processes and whatever. They're always at a disadvantage. So again, if you can find a way to not have to rely solely on these black box fraud detection vendors, whether it's fraud detection or brand safety detection, whatever, and you have a way to look at your own analytics. I mean, for the brand safety stuff, it's like, okay, well, did your ads end up on a hate speech site? Or did your ads end up on a coronavirus disinformation site? If you had the list of domains where your ads actually ran and you had enough detail and you just took a few minutes to look through those placement reports, you can solve this yourself. You
Hmm.
don't have to pay extra money to a brand safety detection company and think that they're actually catching it all, because they're not, right? And we've seen many examples where they're blocking the front page of New York Times and Wall Street Journal because of their crappy detection, right? They make it out to be, oh, machine learning and AI and all that kind of stuff, but it all boiled down to the front page contained the word COVID-19. So the ad
Mm-hmm.
was right. So it's basic keyword list. It's not any of the fancy stuff that they said it was. It's just basic dumb keyword list. Right. So
Amazing.
again, just use your common sense, look at the analytics, do what small businesses do. Like actually manage your own digital marketing campaigns, and you'll be better off than paying for
Mm-hmm.
all these additional services that don't work the way you think they work.
Yeah, and like you just described, just looking simply at the domain list could probably, remove like 80% of what's going on and focus your budget on the 20% of domains that are legitimate, that
Yes.
are known, that you can go look at and
Yes.
verify that this is made for a human and it's where people that I would target would go. Um,
Exactly. And
I
there's one thing that you might find interesting. I use this in class. I ask my students to name off as quickly as possible 10 sites you visit every day, right? So they'll start rattling off a few, but once they get to 4 or 5 or 6, they can't get past 7 or 8 because humans don't visit more than 10 sites regularly every day, right? They
mhm.
might visit a recipe site once in a while when they need to look up a recipe, right? But they rarely repeatedly visit sites, that many sites. So it's usually the same set of sites. If you do the same exercise, right, name off mobile apps that you use every day as quickly as possible, they will kind of slow down when they get to 7 or 8. So common sense will tell you humans visit a very finite number of sites and use a very finite number of apps every single day. And those are the places you want to be, even if the CPMs are higher, because those are legitimate places, right? The CPMs are higher for sure, but you don't have to buy that much quantity, right? So the favorite pastime of a lot of marketers in the last 10 years is just buying billions upon billions of ads because they think more is better, right? If we
Mhm.
spray our message out to more people. But again, they're not people, they're bots, right? So if you just bought smaller quantity of ads on a higher quality site, even if the CPM's higher, you're still going to end up spending less money than you do now and getting more outcomes.
Amazing. It's funny. So my background's in journalism, and I'm like I said, I'm fascinated with the headlines that focus on spend. But I also wonder if, from a marketing perspective, the modern narrative of modern marketing, I don't think helps because I think there is some assumption, if you're drinking the branding Kool-Aid, so to speak,
Yep.
that there's this assumption that people want to engage with your brand story, or they want,
Yeah.
there's this infection in marketing that
Yep.
consumers actually want to engage with the brand. And I'm sorry, but like you said, banner ads less than 0.1%, email 1% if you're lucky. Click paid search. I've seen 4 or 5%,
Yep.
but that's just the click through.
So let me kind of tie this together. Any
Sure.
tall tale is rooted in some element of truth, right? Some nugget of truth. So these are tall tales, right? The fact that branding and that people will want to engage with your brand. So there are certain cases like Apple or certain cases like JetBlue in their early days. People do want to engage with those brands because they
Hmm.
earn the right to have a dialogue with those people.
Right.
But right now, a lot of marketers just think, oh, if we send out more banner ads and we target them to people that they would want to engage with you. No, that's not the same thing, right? You don't have any relationship with them. And this ties in with also the data on ad blocking, right? The
Mm.
amount of ads has gotten so bad over the last 10 years that humans are actively blocking the ads. So some
Yes.
data that I pulled recently, on the desktop side, it's reaching 30% ad blocking, right? So
Wow.
humans are blocking your ads and bots are not because it's their job to cause the ads to load. So if you're still doing ads in programmatic and not buying it from legitimate publishers directly, you're disproportionately serving it to the bots that don't block ads because a larger and larger portion of the humans in that mix are actually blocking your ad. So, it just doesn't make any sense if you're not looking at outcomes, right? The quantity metrics are all completely out of whack. And there's a lot of hidden things like the fact that a third of the humans are blocking your ads, so they're never going to see it anyway, right? So now you're marketing disproportionately to bot traffic in programmatic channels.
Amazing. Amazing. There's a couple of things. So, like you said, the tide's turning and you're putting out some really good information about what marketers can follow and some trends that you're seeing. And one of the things that struck me the other day, it was what I was trying to find earlier. It's iPhone users. Targeting iPhone users, turns out that you're actually getting humans when
Yeah.
you're doing that.
Yep. So I think the problem recently, in the discussion around privacy, is that Apple has made these moves where they're doing away with the third-party cookies or they're actively deleting it in Safari, right?
Hmm.
So a lot of marketers have been told by their ad tech vendors that, oh, well, if you don't have those third-party cookies, you can't track and therefore you can't target anymore. So that's fine. So there's an issue of the cookies, third-party cookies going away and the reduction of targeting. But, I've also written about the topic of the targeting not being very accurate anyway. And I won't get into that for right now. But even if you don't have the targeting for iOS devices, if you just look around, right, a lot of humans are using iPhones and iOS devices, right? And that study that I posted was saying that teenagers disproportionately use iPhones, right? And I can
Right.
ask my kids and your kids, you can see all their peers have iPhones, not Android devices. So for the marketers, because of their fear of the reduction of targeting, they're now not targeting iOS devices or not even bidding on it, right? So now we have a huge, amount of inventory that the advertisers are simply not bidding on it or just deliberately bidding less on it. So if you get your ad on an iPhone, even if you don't have 15 targeting parameters, at a very minimum, you're getting your ad in front of a human. And to me, that's almost like the prerequisite. That's the first step before any of those other targeting parameters, right? Because if you can't get this first step right, showing your ad to a human, none of those other targeting parameters are going to matter. So for the advertisers, it's almost like an insider tip here. Set up a campaign line, target iOS only, with nothing else, right? Maybe with some basic age or demographic information, right? One or two parameters. You're going to be much better off than trying to buy 15 targeting parameters, trying to target Android devices. And oh, by the way, from my research, bots love to pretend to be Android devices
Yes.
because they have cookies, they can earn more from the retargeting, the targeting parameters, the audience segments, and all that kind of stuff. Whereas it's much harder for bad guys to pretend to be iOS devices. So you're getting like a double bonus, if you will, getting your ad in front of humans, and you're much lower risk of ad fraud when you're advertising on iOS devices.
That's great. That's great. And it's one of those things that might be, slightly counterintuitive, but it makes complete sense that it's harder to fake. These are the people and yeah, I saw that same article. I think it's like 70% of teens or something like that.
Yeah, and I don't put a lot of weight into the absolute number, so
Right.
it's just say majority, right? And if you just look around yourself with just common everyday experience, yes, a lot of people, like, our doctor friends, most doctors are on iPhones. They're not on Android devices, right? So,
Hmm.
for some of my pharma clients, if they just targeted iOS devices, they can get their ads to the doctors that they intend to get it to.
That's awesome. Okay. Hey, let's try. I'm going to start wrapping this up, but you
Okay.
brought up cookies. And I think that would be a great way to kind of finish off is what are you seeing? What's happening with cookies? I mean, the news has been a little quiet about this. What's happening with cookies that we should be aware of and plan for in the next few months or years?
Yeah, I think the large companies like Google, they had previously announced plans to do away with third-party cookies in Chrome. And because Chrome represents two-thirds of the browser market share, that was a very significant move. But they pulled back on that, right?
Hmm.
And so far, Apple has been the only one to start enforcing some of these privacy things in iOS 15 and beyond, right? So you should assume that cookies are going to go away, right? We don't know exactly when they're going to go away. And we're talking specifically third-party cookies, not first-party
Right.
cookies. And again, the difference is first party is set by the publisher, right? So when you go to New York Times, you get a New York Times cookie. That's totally fine. Third-party cookies are all the other ad tech vendors that are installed on the page and setting cookies and tracking people across sites without their knowledge. That's the part that's going away.
Yep.
So you should assume that cookies are going away. But you should not panic that cookies are going away because, like I said before, there's other studies. If people want to see that, they can look on my LinkedIn. But the cookies were used for targeting, but the targeting was based on inferred data or derived data, right? And they derive those audience segments from website visitation patterns. So they're trying to figure out who these people are, what they like, based on the collection of websites or pages that they visit. And as you can imagine, some of that is actually terribly inaccurate. So over the years, as a lot of marketers bought these audience segments or targeting parameters, they paid extra for it. What they didn't realize is how crappy those segments were, how crappy or inaccurate the targeting was. So when cookies go away, I actually think of it as an inadvertent reason for the marketers to end up doing better digital marketing because they're no longer wasting as much money on targeting parameters and audience segments that didn't work anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. And one way I show my students this is we go look at the ad settings in their Google account. And I'll post the link there, but you can go see all these segments that Google has placed you based on your browsing history. And one example I showed them is it says that I like cats or I have an interest in cats. And I explained the only reason that's there is because my oldest daughter had a cat. She moved away and she couldn't take the cat with her. And so I'm posting the cat on places to get rid of it. And come
Yeah,
take this cat, get rid of it. I don't want it. But because I was visiting those sites, Google now thinks that I have an interest in cats.
exactly. Right. And
And
a lot of times we see that retargeting stuff, right? So you visited
yeah,
sites once or you bought a baby gift for a friend who had a baby. Now all the algorithms think you had a baby, right? So they keep retargeting you with the ads that are completely irrelevant to you. So yeah, all of those things are basically algorithms making assumptions, and so that's not terribly accurate. I will say that on Google, where a lot of users are logged in all day long, right? They're logged into
hmm
Gmail, they're logged into YouTube. Google has better information about those users. And then similarly on Facebook, people are logged into Facebook or Instagram all day long. So those two platforms actually have more accurate data based on historic usage of the humans. Whereas
hmm
a lot of the ad tech companies, because humans are not logged in to the content sites that they're visiting, they are only looking at or collecting website visitation patterns, and they're now trying to infer who they are and what they like based on website visitation, and that's the part that's not very accurate. So
yeah.
that's what leads to these segments and targeting parameters sold through programmatic channels to be not very accurate.
Absolutely. It's always, and that's the thing, being in this industry and getting served an ad, especially when I go to YouTube, I'm always interested to see who's targeting me and what kind of an ad it is, because that tells me who people think I am.
Yes.
And there's always a celebration when we get a foreign language ad because we've
Yep.
been doing something else and yay, they mistargeted us.
Yep.
So it's always a fun day. So what you're saying, don't worry about cookies. It can actually make our marketing better. And I love that message because it gets back to basic, let's brand on a large scale instead of branding to 20 people who we think
Yep.
our brand is perfect for. Well,
So
Dr.
if I
Fu,
were
oh,
to
good.
wrap
Yeah.
So if I were to wrap this up, I would just remind people, marketing is not a set it, forget it kind of video game, right? You really have to roll up your sleeves a little bit, right? And dig into some of the analytics. And when you have detailed enough analytics, your common sense and your gut feeling will tell you when something looks wrong, right? So you can use those analytics to not only find the stuff that's not good, but also corroborate that things are actually working well. And I would encourage more marketers to kind of be like small business owners and focus on outcomes, right? To the extent that you can. I understand large companies have departmental silos where it's really hard to get all the data you need, but focus as much as you can on outcomes so that you can actually see that your digital marketing is working well for you. So we can now get back to real digital marketing after a decade of fancy looking metrics that don't mean anything.
Wonderful. That is a perfect perfect wrap up and summary of the discussion. Thank you so much, Dr. Fou, for your time today. I really appreciate it. And again, just, a solid hour of great information.
Thank you, Matt.
Thank you.
Glad to be here with you. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. And thank you, dear listener, for tuning in to another episode of the Endless Coffee Cup. I look forward to seeing you again on future episodes. Thanks again. You've been listening to the Endless Coffee Cup. If you enjoyed this episode, share it with somebody else. And of course, please take just a moment and rate or review us at your favorite podcast service. If you need more information, contact me at sitelogicmarketing.com. Thanks again for being such a great listener.